You surely know that Donald Trump called BRICS a direct threat to the American dollar. He's not wrong. While Washington worries, China just launched a payment system that settles international transactions in 8 seconds instead of 5 days. The financial world is splitting in two, and most people have no idea it's happening. I'm Anastasia, and this is Think BRICS, where we collect and report the real BRICS news that mainstream outlets often overlook. Today, we are breaking down four major developments that signal where the global economy is actually headed. First, the G20 summit in South Africa and why the US president skipped it. Second, why Washington is suddenly so worried about BRICS if it's supposedly just a talking shop. Third, the hard numbers showing which economies are actually growing. And fourth, the payment system China built that nobody's talking about. Without further ado, let's get into it. The G20 will meet in Johannesburg next Saturday, November 22nd and 23rd. South Africa holds the presidency this year. That's significant because South Africa sits at a unique intersection. It's both a developing nation and a BRICS member with access to Western forums. They have spent the year pushing African priorities: financial reform, climate finance, debt relief for low-income countries. They successfully got the African Union permanent G20 membership back in 2023. Here is what catching attention. President Trump won't attend. He cited concerns about white Afrikaners in South Africa, which the South African government and most analysts have dismissed as baseless. Meanwhile, China will send Premier Li Qiang. Russia will send Deputy Head Maxim Oreshkin. The summit will proceed without the United States. What does that tell you about shifting diplomatic gravity? South Africa's position as host gives it real power. They're acting as a bridge between the global south and developed economies. They can translate African development concerns to Western-led institutions while bringing BRICS priorities to the G20 table. This dual role makes them uniquely positioned to shape the conversation. There is also a trade angle here. The African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, gives African nations duty-free access to US markets. It's set to expire, and Washington is hesitating to renew it. Why? Competition with China in Africa. For South Africa, AGOA covers over half of their non-energy exports. Automotive, manufacturing, apparel, these sectors employ tens of thousands of people, but Washington sees Africa differently now, not as a recipient of aid, but as a player with options. So, if BRICS is just an empty shell with no real power, why is Washington so concerned? Let's look at a policy memo from the Hudson Institute, a conservative think tank in Washington. The author is Zainab Ribowa, and the title is direct: How to Counter BRICS and Preserve Global Dollar Dominance. The Hudson Institute has deep ties to Republican foreign policy circles. Former Trump administration figures like Mike Pompeo and Nikki Haley have been associated with it. This organization represents mainstream conservative thinking on national security. China certainly takes it seriously. In April 2023, Beijing imposed sanctions on the Hudson Institute and its leaders, freezing their assets in China and banning Chinese institutions from engaging with them. The memo treats BRICS as a material threat to American financial power, a present danger. BRICS wants to build financial channels that Washington can't monitor or control. America's global power rests on two things: the centrality of the dollar and control over SWIFT. SWIFT is the messaging system that banks use for international transfers. If you are cut off from SWIFT, you are cut off from global finance. The US has used this as a weapon, sanctioning countries by blocking their access. BRICS is building systems that bypass this entirely. The memo recommends aggressive countermeasures. Here is the key one. Any bank that uses a BRICS clearing system should immediately lose access to SWIFT and dollar transactions. That's not a suggestion. It's a financial ultimatum. Choose us or choose them. You can't have both. The memo also calls for stronger oversight of digital assets to prevent sanctions evasion. This references Trump's signing of the Genius Act in July 2025, legislation focused on stablecoins, and it recommends diplomatic pressure on any country considering BRICS membership. The language is blunt. Remind them of the costs of aligning with a project designed to weaken the United States. These aren't the recommendations of people worried about an irrelevant organization. When you see proposals this aggressive, it tells you something. The threat perception in Washington is real. President Trump himself said it plainly in July 2025. BRICS was set up to hurt us. BRICS was set up to degenerate our dollar. That quote captures the anxiety. The dollar's role as the global reserve currency gives America extraordinary power. It can print money to finance deficits, impose sanctions with global reach, and shape economic policy worldwide. BRICS threatens that position through financial alternatives. Here is what both sides avoid saying. The real driver isn't just sanctions, it's economics. The US needs negative real rates to manage its debt load that quietly erodes the value of dollar reserves. Countries holding hundreds of billions in treasuries are watching their purchasing power shrink. Washington emphasizes the sanctions angle because it's less damaging than admitting the economic foundation is cracking. BRICS emphasizes sanctions too, but for different reasons. They can't publicly question US solvency without devaluing the dollar assets they still hold. Quick note: Think BRICS is a small operation. We are not funded by think tanks or major donors. We depend on viewers like you to keep this research going. If you find this valuable, consider supporting us on Substack or hitting the subscribe button. It helps us grow and produce more in-depth analysis. Back to the story. Let's talk about actual economic performance. The IMF released projections in October 2025. BRICS nations are forecast to grow at 3.8% in 2025 and 3.7% in next 2026. The G7 nations, 1% in 2025 and 1.2% in 2026. That's more than 3 times the growth rate. India is leading with 6.6% growth in 2025. Ethiopia is projected at 7.2%. China stabilizes around 4.8%. Even Russia and Iran, under heavy sanctions, maintain positive growth between 0.6 and 1.1%. Compare that to Germany, once Europe's economic engine, projected at just 0.2% growth in 2025. What do these numbers mean practically? More than half of global GDP expansion in the coming years will come from BRICS nations. That's not speculation or propaganda. That's IMF data. Where GDP grows, trade activity follows, capital flows follow, diplomatic influence follows. There is also a resource angle. With the 2024 expansion, BRICS now controls 24% of global oil reserves and nearly 3/4 of rare earth reserves. If Saudi Arabia formally joins, that oil figure jumps to 40%. On the institutional side, intra-BRICS trade has nearly doubled since 2012. It went from 10% of members' trade to 18% in 2023. BRICS members increased their gold reserves from 6% in early 2022 to nearly 13% of foreign exchange reserves. Their dollar holdings dropped below 50%. The new development bank has doubled its project approval since 2020, and they're connecting national payment systems. India's UPI China's CIPS, Brazil's PIX, Russia's SPFS, through something called BRICS Pay. A working prototype was presented at BRICS International Municipal Forum in St. Petersburg in 2025, which we attended. Does this sound like a talking shop to you? Here is the development that changes everything. China launched a cross-border payment system for the digital yuan. It's called renminbi digital. This isn't a direct SWIFT competitor in name, but it functions as a complete alternative for anyone trading with China. Here is why it matters. A typical international payment through SWIFT takes 3 to 5 days. China's digital currency bridge does it in 7 to 8 seconds. During tests between Hong Kong and Abu Dhabi, payment commissions dropped by 98%. Middle Eastern energy traders report cutting settlement costs by up to 75%. The system is already connected to 10 ASEAN countries and 6 Middle Eastern nations. It's operational in Russia and other CIS countries. That coverage allows it to process calculations for up to 38% of global trade. By 2025, the system processed over $90 billion equivalent in digital yuan. The overall volume of international payments exceeded $1.2 trillion. 23 central banks worldwide are already testing the digital currency bridge. Iran, cut off from SWIFT by sanctions, is pushing hard for digital currency adoption within BRICS. Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf advocates for crypto as a tool for independent trade. He's urging India and other partners to accept digital assets, which could cut transaction costs by up to 30% compared to traditional banking. This is the practical reality of de-dollarization, not theoretical, not distant future, happening now with real volume, real savings, real adoption. So what are we actually watching here? We are watching the construction of a parallel financial system, one that processes payments faster and cheaper than the existing infrastructure, one that doesn't route through Western oversight. The growth numbers show the economic foundation is solid. The institutional development shows the political will is there. And the technology, the digital yuan system, shows it's technically feasible. BRICS is building alternatives so countries have options. So they are not subject to financial coercion when policy disagreements arise. Whether you see this as a threat or an opportunity probably depends on where you sit. But either way, it's reshaping how global commerce works. So the big question now is how the existing powers are going to adapt to a multipolar financial system. Think about that, and thanks for watching.